The federal judge's gavel struck with finality. 8-year-old Elijah Carter stood beside his mother, their hands clasped tight. "This court finds the defendant airline guilty of discrimination," announced Judge Wilson. The courtroom erupted. Nobody believed a child's photographic memory would change aviation law forever. Before we dive into this incredible story of courage and justice, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community fighting for equality. Now let's rewind to see how a single plane ride transformed not just one family's life, but American aviation law forever. Jasmine Carter checked her watch anxiously as she guided her 8-year-old son Elijah through Atlanta International Airport. They couldn't afford to miss this flight. As one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, Jasmine had been invited to present her groundbreaking research at a prestigious medical conference in Boston. This presentation could change countless lives. "Mom, did you know that approximately 20,000 commercial flights take off every day in America?" Elijah asked, his eyes darting around the bustling terminal. Jasmine smiled despite her nervousness. Elijah wasn't like other kids. Diagnosed with a photographic memory at age 4, he absorbed information like a sponge and never forgot a single detail. While other children carried stuffed animals, Elijah clutched a book about aviation law he'd found in the airport bookstore. "That's fascinating, honey," she replied, steering them toward their gate. "Remember, we're in seats 3A and 3B. First class, because this trip is special." They arrived at the gate with 20 minutes to spare. Jasmine had splurged on first-class tickets, wanting to ensure they'd both be well-rested for her presentation. As a single mother who'd worked her way through medical school, she rarely indulged, but this conference could cement her reputation in the field. When boarding began, Jasmine and Elijah stood in the first-class line, boarding passes ready. The flight attendant, Sarah Thompson, smiled warmly at the passengers ahead of them, but her expression noticeably cooled when the Carters stepped forward. "I think you're in the wrong line," Sarah said, not even glancing at their tickets. "General boarding is over there." "We're in first class," Jasmine replied calmly, presenting their boarding passes. "Seats 3A and 3B. Sarah examined their tickets with exaggerated scrutiny, her lips pursed. "These seem unusual. Let me verify this." She spent nearly 2 minutes checking their tickets while waving other passengers through with barely a glance. Elijah observed everything, his eyes recording each detail. He noticed how the white passengers' tickets received only cursory glances, if any. He saw the flight attendant's expression shift from professional to suspicious when addressing his mother. He committed it all to memory. Finally cleared to board, they settled into their spacious first-class seats. Elijah immediately opened the safety card, memorizing every word while Jasmine reviewed her presentation notes. Their momentary peace was shattered when a tall, white businessman in an expensive suit stopped at their row. Thomas Bradford, as his luggage tag identified him, glared down at them. "You're in my seat," he announced loudly, ignoring the seat numbers clearly visible above them. "I believe there's a mistake," Jasmine replied. "We're in 3A and 3B, as assigned on our boarding passes." Bradford's face flushed red. "There's obviously been a booking error. I always sit in 3A when I fly this route. I'm a Platinum Executive member." "I understand, sir," Jasmine said, maintaining her composure. "But our tickets clearly assign us these seats. Perhaps the gate agent can help find you another first-class seat." Rather than seek assistance, Bradford pressed the call button. Sarah Thompson appeared almost instantly. "These people are in my seat," Bradford stated flatly. Without asking to see anyone's boarding pass, Sarah turned to Jasmine. "Ma'am, there seems to be a confusion. Perhaps you misread your ticket." "There's no confusion," Jasmine replied, presenting her boarding pass again. "Our assigned seats are 3A and 3B." Elijah quietly reached for his mother's phone, turning on the voice recorder app. Though young, he recognized the familiar pattern unfolding, one he'd witnessed too many times before. Sarah examined their tickets again and frowned. "Let me get my supervisor." Minutes later, the head flight attendant, Michael Reynolds, arrived. Without even reviewing their tickets, he addressed Jasmine. "Ma'am, we need you to move to accommodate this passenger." "On what grounds?" Jasmine asked, her doctor's composure still intact. "We purchased these specific seats for this flight." "Sir," Reynolds said, turning to Bradford while completely ignoring Jasmine's question, "would another first-class seat be acceptable?" "No," Bradford replied smugly. "I specifically need 3A for leg room due to my height." Jasmine, standing 5'10" herself, raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Reynolds turned back to Jasmine. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, we'll need to have you escorted off the aircraft." Other passengers began to notice the commotion. Some took out their phones, recording the interaction. Elijah continued to observe silently, his young mind cataloging every word, every expression, every procedural violation occurring before him. "I will not be moving from the seats I rightfully purchased," Jasmine stated firmly. "This is discriminatory treatment, and I'd like to speak with the captain." Reynolds' face hardened. "That won't be necessary. Security will escort you off if you continue to be difficult." Bradford smirked as the confrontation escalated. What no one realized was that behind Elijah's quiet exterior, a formidable mind was piecing together a legal strategy that would eventually bring an entire airline to its knees. 2 airport security officers boarded the plane, their expressions grim as they approached row 3. Passengers fell silent, the atmosphere thick with tension. Jasmine sat straight-backed in her assigned seat, her hand protectively over Elijah's. "Ma'am, we need you and your son to gather your belongings and come with us," the taller officer stated. "May I ask why we're being removed?" Jasmine questioned calmly. "The flight crew has determined you're being disruptive," he replied. Bradford stood nearby, arms crossed with satisfaction as he watched the scene unfold. Head flight attendant Reynolds hovered behind the security officers, avoiding eye contact with anyone filming the incident. "We haven't been disruptive," Jasmine countered. "We're simply occupying the seats we purchased. The disruption began when this gentleman incorrectly claimed our seats and the crew supported him without verification." The second security officer reached for Jasmine's carry-on bag. "Ma'am, please don't make this more difficult." That's when it happened. Elijah, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, stood up. At just 4'3", he barely reached the officers' waists, but his voice carried a confidence that immediately commanded attention. "Excuse me, officers," he said clearly. "Before you remove us, I believe you should know that under Federal Aviation Regulation Title 14, Section 250. 2A, it states that no passenger with confirmed reserved space can be denied boarding involuntarily except in cases of overbooking, which isn't applicable here since our seats aren't being claimed by another ticketed passenger but by someone who prefers our seats over his assigned one." The cabin fell completely silent. Even Bradford's smug expression faltered. Elijah continued, his voice steady. "Additionally, Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin by any program receiving federal funding, which includes commercial airlines. The disparate treatment my mother has received compared to other passengers appears to violate this statute." The security officers exchanged bewildered glances. Reynolds stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Young man, this isn't a courtroom. Your mother needs to comply with crew instructions." Elijah nodded respectfully. "I understand the authority of flight crew under FAR 121.580, sir. However, that regulation requires that the instruction be lawful. Discriminatory treatment isn't lawful." He reached for his mother's phone. "I've been recording this interaction, as is legal in Georgia without two-party consent. I've documented that my mother and I presented valid boarding passes for these seats multiple times, yet the verification process applied to us differed substantially from that applied to other passengers. Reynolds' face paled. Bradford stepped back, suddenly less interested in the confrontation. A woman seated across the aisle stood up. "I've been watching this entire interaction," she announced. "I'm Dr. Amanda Parker from Harvard Medical School, and I can confirm everything this child has said. The treatment of Dr. Carter and her son has been appalling." Other passengers murmured in agreement. The security officers looked increasingly uncomfortable. The commotion eventually brought the captain, James Wilson, out of the cockpit. "What's the problem here?" he demanded. Reynolds pulled him aside, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing toward the Carters. Captain Wilson approached, his expression stern. "Dr. Carter, I understand there's a seating dispute." Before Jasmine could answer, Elijah spoke up again. "Captain, there's no dispute about the seating assignments. Our boarding passes clearly show 3A and 3B, which has been verified multiple times. The issue is that Mr. Bradford wants our seats despite having different assignments, and your crew has supported his demand without proper verification while threatening to remove us from the aircraft." Elijah pulled out his tablet and opened a document. "I've been tracking the interaction since we boarded. 7 white passengers in first class had their boarding passes checked with an average verification time of 4.3 seconds. My mother's pass was scrutinized for 1 minute and 42 seconds. 6 white passengers were addressed by name or as sir or ma'am when their seating was verified. My mother was referred to as you people twice." Captain Wilson blinked, clearly taken aback by the child's detailed analysis. Bradford, sensing the situation turning against him, suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Jasmine's laptop bag. "If you're going to make such a scene, I'll just take my seat that I paid for." Several passengers gasped. Dr. Parker immediately stood between Bradford and Jasmine. "Sir, that's theft and assault. As witnesses, we won't allow it." The security officers, now realizing they'd been called into a situation very different from what they'd been told, stepped in to separate Bradford from the Carter's belongings. Captain Wilson surveyed the scene, aware that multiple passengers were recording every moment. With social media backlash and potential lawsuits looming, he made a quick decision. "Mr. Bradford, we'll find you another suitable seat in first class. Dr. Carter and her son will remain in their assigned seats." He turned to Reynolds. "Ensure they receive proper service for the remainder of the flight." Bradford protested loudly, but 2 flight attendants guided him to a different first-class seat. The security officers left the aircraft, and slowly, the tension began to dissipate. As Jasmine squeezed Elijah's hand in silent gratitude, neither realized that their ordeal was far from over. Bradford's humiliation would fuel a vendetta that would follow them all the way to Boston and beyond. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jasmine exhaled slowly, the adrenaline from their confrontation finally ebbing. Beside her, Elijah returned to reading his aviation law book, his small fingers tracing each line of text. "You were incredible back there," she whispered, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Where did you learn all those regulations?" Elijah shrugged modestly. "I read the Federal Aviation Administration website last week when you told me we were flying. I wanted to make sure we'd be safe." Several passengers stopped by their seats to offer quiet words of support or apologetic smiles. A flight attendant, not Sarah or Michael, brought them each a glass of orange juice with a whispered, "I'm so sorry about what happened." From 10 rows back, Thomas Bradford glared at them, his jaw clenched as he whispered intensely to a flight attendant. Jasmine tried to focus on her presentation notes, but the weight of his stare made concentration impossible. "Mom," Elijah said softly, "I think we should document everything that happens for the rest of the flight. Just in case." Jasmine nodded, once again marveling at her son's perceptiveness. At 8 years old, he already understood that their moment of victory might be temporary. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. The flight attendants moved methodically through first class, serving each passenger with practiced efficiency. Bradford received his meal first, despite being seated farther back. Row by row, the service continued until only the Carters remained without food. When Jasmine pressed the call button, Michael Reynolds appeared with a tight smile. "Yes. We haven't received our meal service," Jasmine said. "Oh, it seems we're short one meal. I'll check if there's anything in economy we can bring you," he replied without apology. Elijah spoke up. "Sir, I noticed every other passenger in first class received their pre-ordered meals. My mother specifically requested the kosher option when booking, and I was to have the child's meal." Reynolds' smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes these things happen. I'll see what I can do." 20 minutes passed. Passengers finished their meals while the Carters waited. Finally, Sarah Thompson approached with a tray holding a salad and a sandwich. "This is all we could find," she said, placing it carelessly on Jasmine's tray table. As she turned to leave, her arm accidentally knocked over Jasmine's water glass, soaking the medical presentation papers Jasmine had been reviewing. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Sarah exclaimed, making no move to help as Jasmine frantically tried to save her work. Elijah quickly grabbed napkins from his tray, blotting the papers while Jasmine used her cocktail napkin to salvage what she could. Throughout it all, Elijah noticed Bradford watching with a satisfied smirk. As Sarah walked away, Elijah heard her mutter to another flight attendant in the galley, "She should be grateful we didn't put her in cargo where she belongs." Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he helped his mother reorganize her damp papers. He'd heard similar comments before, at school, in stores, even at his mother's hospital, but the cruelty still stung each time. Midway through the flight, Elijah needed to use the restroom. As he walked down the aisle, he noticed another black passenger, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, engaged in a heated discussion with Michael Reynolds. "Sir, I've pressed my call button 6 times in the past hour," the man was saying. "Every passenger around me has received service except me." "We've been very busy, sir," Reynolds replied dismissively. "Perhaps you didn't notice us assisting others." Elijah paused, listening. The man sighed heavily. "I've been flying this route weekly for 15 years. I've never experienced service this poor until today." On his return from the restroom, Elijah stopped at the man's seat. "Excuse me, sir. I couldn't help overhearing. My mother and I have been experiencing similar treatment." The man studied Elijah thoughtfully, then extended his hand. "Professor David Williams, Harvard Law School." "Elijah Carter, sir. My mom is Dr. Jasmine Carter. We're headed to the medical conference." Professor Williams smiled. "I've read your mother's research on neurological trauma in underserved communities. Brilliant work." His expression grew serious. "And you said you're experiencing similar issues on this flight?" Elijah nodded, explaining everything that had happened since boarding. "That's deeply troubling," Professor Williams replied. "Would you and your mother like to document this together? I've been recording my experiences as well." When Elijah returned to his seat, he whispered to Jasmine about Professor Williams. For the remainder of the flight, they discreetly documented every interaction, every slight, every forgotten service. Professor Williams did the same, occasionally catching Elijah's eye with an encouraging nod. As the plane began its descent into Boston, Jasmine allowed herself to relax slightly. "Almost there," she murmured. "Once we're off this plane, this nightmare will be over." Elijah wasn't so sure. He'd noticed Bradford making numerous phone calls throughout the flight, his expression growing more satisfied with each one. Something told Elijah their ordeal was just beginning. When the plane touched down at Logan International Airport, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston. Local time is 4:45 p.m., and the temperature is 63 degrees. Please remain seated until we reach the gate." As passengers prepared to disembark, two security officers entered the plane and approached the Carter's row. "Dr. Jasmine Carter," one asked grimly. "Yes." Jasmine replied, her voice barely audible. "We need you to come with us. There's been an accusation of threatening behavior made against you." Jasmine's face drained of color. "What? That's absurd." From his new seat, Bradford watched with undisguised triumph as security escorted Jasmine and a terrified Elijah from the aircraft, past the staring eyes of other passengers. Professor Williams stood quickly. "I'm coming too," he announced, following them. "This isn't over." The sterile interrogation room at Logan International Airport felt like ice despite the warm June evening outside. Elijah sat alone on a hard plastic chair, his legs dangling inches from the floor. 30 minutes had passed since security officers had separated him from his mother, ignoring her tearful protests. "It's just procedural," they'd claimed, leading Jasmine down a different corridor. Elijah's photographic memory replayed every moment of their separation in excruciating detail, his mother's face contorted with fear, her desperate plea, "He's just a child. Please don't take him." The door opened, and a stern-faced TSA agent entered. "Your mother is being questioned about an incident on the flight," she explained without warmth. "We need to take your statement separately." "I want to see my mom," Elijah said, his voice small but steady. After questioning, the agent replied, "We also need to secure any recording devices." "I understand you were recording on the plane." Elijah clutched his mother's phone tighter. "This is my mom's property. You need a warrant to take it." The agent's eyebrows shot up. "Young man, this is a matter of airline security." With respect, Elijah responded, summoning his courage, "The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable search and seizure. Unless you have probable cause and a warrant, you can't take this phone." A soft knock interrupted their standoff. The door opened to reveal a Latina woman in a sharp suit. "I'm attorney Lisa Rodriguez, representing Dr. Carter and her son," she announced, placing a business card on the table. "I'll need a moment alone with my client." The TSA agent hesitated, then reluctantly left the room. "Elijah?" The attorney knelt beside him. "Professor Williams called me. I'm here to help you and your mother." Tears of relief filled Elijah's eyes. "They took my mom somewhere else. Mr. Bradford from the plane made a false accusation." Lisa nodded. "I know. He's claiming your mother threatened him during the flight, which we know is untrue. Professor Williams is working to secure her release now. Can you tell me exactly what happened, with as much detail as possible?" Elijah closed his eyes briefly, then recounted every moment of their ordeal with perfect recall, exact timestamps, verbatim conversations, precise descriptions of each interaction. "At 9:42 a.m., Sarah Thompson told my mother, 'I think you're in the wrong line,' despite clearly seeing our first-class boarding passes. At 9:47 a.m., Thomas Bradford claimed, 'You're in my seat,' even though our boarding passes showed seats 3A and 3B. Lisa typed furiously on her laptop, occasionally glancing up in amazement at Elijah's detailed account. Meanwhile, across the airport, Thomas Bradford stood in the office of Henry Patterson, Northeast Regional Director for Atlantic Airways. Bradford's face flushed with self-importance as he recounted his version of events. "She was hostile from the beginning," Patterson threatened me when I politely questioned the seating arrangement. The boy was recording without consent, probably planning this whole scene for a lawsuit. You know how these people are." Patterson nodded grimly. "We've already issued a statement supporting our crew's actions. Dr. Carter has been placed on our no-fly list pending investigation." "Good," Bradford replied. "I've got connections at the medical conference too. By morning, her reputation will be finished." Back in the interrogation room, Lisa's phone buzzed with a text from Professor Williams, "Jay being released. No charges. Bradford pushing airline to ban her. Need to move quickly." Lisa turned to Elijah. Your mom's being released now. But we need to protect the evidence on that phone. May I? Elijah handed her the device. Lisa quickly backed up the recordings to a secure cloud server, then returned it. Now no matter what happens, we have proof. The door burst open, and Jasmine rushed in, gathering Elijah into her arms. My baby, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Are you okay? Before Elijah could answer, Lisa interrupted gently. We need to leave immediately. The airline is already making public statements about the incident. Outside the airport, they huddled in Lisa's car, watching breaking news on her iPad, disruptive passengers removed from Atlantic Airways flight, airline cites security concerns. The accompanying video, clearly edited, showed only the moment when Jasmine raised her voice after Bradford grabbed her bag. There was no context, no sign of the discrimination that preceded it. Social media exploded with opinions, many condemning Jasmine without knowing the full story. The hashtag Atlantic Airways incident was trending, with some commenters making overtly racist remarks about people who don't know their place. Jasmine closed her eyes in despair. The conference. My presentation is tomorrow morning. I was receiving the Jacobson Award for my research. Lisa squeezed her hand. One battle at a time, Jasmine. Let's get you both somewhere safe tonight. Did this airline's actions remind you of discrimination you've witnessed or experienced? Comment number 1 if you believe companies should be held accountable for racial bias. Comment number 2 if you think Elijah was right to stand up for his mother. Hit that like button if you want to see justice served in this situation, and subscribe to follow this family's fight against a powerful corporation. What do you think will happen next? Will Jasmine still be able to receive her award? And what will young Elijah do with all the evidence he's collected? Keep watching to find out. The morning sunlight streamed through the hotel windows, illuminating the makeshift war room Lisa Rodriguez had established. Documents covered every surface, 3 laptops displayed different legal statutes, and a whiteboard contained a meticulous timeline of events written in Elijah's neat handwriting. Jasmine entered, looking exhausted. The medical conference had begun without her. Despite frantic calls and emails explaining her situation, the organizing committee had given her presentation slot to another researcher, citing her unprofessional absence and the negative publicity surrounding her. They're not even reviewing the evidence, she said, collapsing into a chair. 20 years of work, and they've decided I'm guilty without investigation. Lisa looked up from her laptop. This goes beyond the airline, Jasmine. Someone's pulling strings behind the scenes. Professor Williams nodded grimly. Bradford has connections throughout the medical industry. He sits on boards of several pharmaceutical companies that sponsor these conferences. Elijah, who had been quietly organizing evidence files on a tablet, spoke up. Mom, I've been researching similar cases. In 63% of discrimination complaints against airlines, the cases are settled privately with non-disclosure agreements. The patterns never become public. Lisa stared at the boy in amazement. Elijah, how do you know all this? I couldn't sleep last night, he replied simply. So I read through the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Complaint database. Lisa exchanged glances with Professor Williams. In 20 years of practicing law, she'd never encountered a mind like Elijah's. We're filing suit today, she announced. Discrimination, defamation, emotional distress, and violation of Department of Transportation regulations. Elijah will be our key witness. A child witness? Jasmine asked worriedly. Will that even be allowed? Professor Williams smiled. A child witness with photographic memory and recordings to back up every claim? Any judge would allow it. By afternoon, the lawsuit had been filed, naming Atlantic Airways, Thomas Bradford, and several employees as defendants. Within hours, the airline's legal team, led by high-powered attorney Jonathan Pierce, requested an emergency hearing to dismiss the case. This is clearly a frivolous lawsuit designed to extract money from the airline, Pierce argued before Judge Hernandez. The plaintiff's primary witness is an 8-year-old child who is obviously being coached by his mother. Lisa stood confidently. Your Honor, this 8-year-old child has photographic memory, documented the entire incident, and can recall every detail with perfect accuracy. We also have audio recordings and corroborating witnesses. The judge denied the motion to dismiss, allowing discovery to proceed. The airline's strategy quickly became clear: discredit Jasmine. Anonymous sources fed stories to the media about her being difficult with hospital staff, aggressive with colleagues, and using the race card to advance her career. None of these allegations came with specific examples or named sources, but the damage to her reputation spread quickly. Lisa expanded their legal team, adding researchers to comb through Atlantic Airways' history. What they found was disturbing. A pattern of similar incidents against minority passengers, all quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. Look at this, Lisa said during a strategy session, spreading documents across the table. In the past 5 years, Atlantic has faced 72 discrimination complaints. 68 were settled with NDAs. The remaining 4 were dismissed on technicalities. They're experts at making these cases disappear, Professor Williams noted. Meanwhile, Bradford's history of complaints against service staff emerged: flight attendants, hotel workers, restaurant servers, particularly women of color. Former colleagues described him as casually racist and enjoying the power to make people's lives difficult. During deposition preparation, Pierce attempted to rattle Elijah with rapid-fire questions and legal jargon. To everyone's surprise, Elijah remained composed, often correcting Pierce's misstatements of aviation regulations. Mr. Pierce, you cited FAA Regulation 121.580 incorrectly, Elijah said politely during one mock session. The regulation requires passenger compliance with lawful crew instructions, not blanket compliance with any instruction regardless of legality. Pierce's face reddened. This kid isn't normal, he muttered to his associates. Back at Jasmine's hospital, colleagues began distancing themselves. Conference invitations dried up. Research partnerships dissolved. Her department chair called her in for a concerned discussion about the distractions affecting her work. As pressure mounted, Atlantic Airways made their move, a settlement offer of $2 million with a strict non-disclosure agreement. It's a substantial offer, Lisa acknowledged during a private discussion with Jasmine. Most clients would take it. Jasmine looked at the document, then at her son who was methodically organizing evidence at the hotel desk. Elijah, what do you think? He turned, his young face serious beyond his years. Mom, I researched the 72 previous cases. If they settled them all for similar amounts, that's $144 million over 5 years. That's just the cost of doing business for them. Nothing will change. But your future, baby, your education, our security. If we take this, Elijah said quietly, what lesson do I learn? That standing up against injustice only matters until someone offers enough money. That some people get to mistreat others if they're rich enough to pay for it afterward. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she tore the settlement papers in half. We're going to trial. The next morning, Atlantic Airways escalated their tactics. Their legal team filed motions challenging Elijah's competency as a witness, arguing that a child couldn't possibly understand the complexities of the case. They demanded psychological evaluations, claiming his memory abilities were scientifically implausible. As the legal battles intensified, the toll on the Carters grew. Returning home to Atlanta between court appearances, they discovered hateful graffiti sprayed across their apartment door, "Go back where you came from." Police investigated half-heartedly, dismissing it as, probably just kids, despite the Carters being the only black family in their building. That night, as Jasmine tucked Elijah into bed in their hotel room, they didn't feel safe at home. She noticed him trembling. "Sweetheart, we can stop this if it's too much," she whispered. We can take the settlement. Elijah shook his head, his eyes revealing a determination far beyond his years. Mom, did you know that in 1955, Rosa Parks was 42 years old when she refused to give up her seat? I'm only 8, but I know when something's wrong. We can't stop now. As Jasmine held her son, neither of them realized that Elijah's simple refusal to back down would soon attract the attention of one of the most powerful civil rights attorneys in America, a man who would help transform their personal fight into a landmark case that would change aviation law forever. The settlement offer from Atlantic Airways sat on the kitchen table of their temporary apartment. $2 million. Enough to secure Elijah's education through medical school. Enough to start fresh somewhere new. Enough to end the nightmare that had consumed their lives for the past 3 months. Jasmine stared at the papers, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Her hospital had placed her on administrative leave pending resolution of the public controversy. Her research grants were under review. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid her. Maybe we should consider it, she murmured, more to herself than to Elijah. Her son looked up from his laptop where he'd been reviewing legal precedents. Since the incident, Elijah had transformed. The shy, book-loving child had become focused, strategic, and startlingly mature. He'd begun wearing button-down shirts to their legal meetings, insisting that presentation matters when fighting for justice. "Mom," he said gently, "can I show you something?" He opened a spreadsheet he'd created, displaying dozens of discrimination cases against airlines over the past decade. These 94 cases all ended with settlements and NDAs, he explained. And look at this timeline. He switched to a graph showing a steadily increasing number of incidents. The settlements aren't stopping the behavior, they're just a business expense. Nothing changes. Jasmine sighed. "Baby, I understand that. But this fight is destroying our lives. Your school called again about your absences. You're having nightmares." Elijah closed his laptop and came to sit beside her. His small hand covered hers. "Mom, remember when you took me to see the Martin Luther King Memorial in Atlanta? You told me Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But it doesn't bend by itself, does it? People have to bend it." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes as she pulled her son close. When had her little boy become so wise? "Besides," Elijah continued, "I have a new legal strategy. I've been studying aviation law cases from the past 50 years. There's a pattern we can use." Later that week, Lisa Rodriguez listened in astonishment as Elijah outlined his approach. He had connected their case to 3 landmark civil rights precedents, finding a pattern that could establish a new legal standard for discrimination in transportation. "This is remarkable," Lisa said when he finished. "Some of these connections weren't obvious even to me." "Elijah," Professor Williams added, "you've essentially created a new legal framework. With your permission, I'd like to bring in someone who might help us implement it." 2 days later, they met with Marcus Johnson, a legendary civil rights attorney who had argued 5 cases before the Supreme Court. In his 70s now, Johnson was selective about the cases he took, but after reviewing Elijah's analysis, he'd flown in immediately. "Young man," Johnson said after listening to Elijah present his strategy, "in 50 years of practicing law, I've never seen a mind like yours." As they expanded their legal approach, the opposition grew fiercer. Their apartment was vandalized again, this time with a brick through the window and a note, "Drop the case or else." The police finally took the threat seriously, but the damage was done. Jasmine and Elijah moved to a secure building with doormen and security cameras. At his new school, Elijah faced immediate bullying. "My dad says your mom is just trying to get rich by playing the race card," one classmate taunted. Rather than fighting back, Elijah started a lunchtime discussion group about civil rights history. Surprisingly, several students joined, curious about the soft-spoken boy whose face they'd seen on the news. Meanwhile, the legal case grew more complex. Atlantic Airways filed motion after motion, hoping to drown the Carters in paperwork and legal fees. They argued that Elijah's recordings violated privacy laws, they didn't, that Professor Williams had a conflict of interest, he didn't, that the case should be moved to a different jurisdiction, denied. Through it all, Elijah continued refining their strategy. He created a comprehensive database of every interaction on the flight, cross-referenced with federal regulations and previous cases. He spent evenings studying legal precedents that even experienced attorneys found challenging. "How do you understand all this?" Lisa asked one evening, finding him reading a complex transportation law textbook. Elijah shrugged. "Words make patterns. I just remember the patterns." His nightmares worsened. Some nights, Jasmine would find him organizing case files at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep after dreams of being separated from her again. One evening, FBI agents arrived at their door. The threatening messages had been traced back to an IP address within Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters. More disturbing, they found evidence that Bradford had been in contact with airline executives before the flight, discussing ways to handle problem passengers. As the case gained momentum, former Atlantic Airways employees began coming forward. Flight attendants described an unwritten policy of extra scrutiny for certain passengers. A former scheduler revealed how minority passengers' complaints were flagged for automatic dismissal. The airline's attorneys grew desperate. During a contentious deposition, Jonathan Pierce tried to provoke Jasmine into an angry response, hoping to paint her as aggressive and unreasonable. "Isn't it true, Dr. Carter, that you have a history of claiming discrimination whenever you don't get your way?" Before Jasmine could respond, Elijah, who was permitted to attend as part of their legal team, slid a note to Marcus Johnson. Johnson read it, then immediately objected. "Counsel is engaging in character assassination without foundation. There is no documented history of such claims." Pierce glared at Elijah, realizing the child had anticipated this line of questioning and prepared a response. As the trial date approached, the pressure intensified. Jasmine received a job offer from a prestigious hospital in California, contingent on dropping the lawsuit. Bradford's pharmaceutical connections ensured that research opportunities remained closed to her throughout the East Coast. One night, after a particularly grueling deposition, Jasmine found Elijah sitting on the balcony of their secure apartment, staring at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "I was thinking about something Mr. Johnson said today," Elijah replied. "About how some cases aren't just about winning but about changing the system." Jasmine nodded. "This has become bigger than just us, hasn't it?" "It always was, Mom. We just didn't know it yet." As they sat together under the vast night sky, mother and son drew strength from each other, unaware that the most challenging part of their journey still lay ahead. A courtroom showdown that would test their resolve to its limits and potentially change aviation law forever. The conference room in Marcus Johnson's law office buzzed with activity. 3 months had passed since they'd rejected the settlement offer, and the trial date loomed just 2 weeks away. Whiteboards covered with timelines, witness lists, and legal strategies lined the walls. A team of paralegals sorted through thousands of documents obtained during discovery. At the center of it all sat Elijah, now 9 years old after celebrating a birthday during depositions. He wore a serious expression as he reviewed his testimony with Marcus Johnson and Lisa Rodriguez. "Remember," Marcus advised, "Pierce will try to confuse you with complex questions. Take your time. If you don't understand something, ask him to clarify." Elijah nodded, his concentration absolute. "I've memorized 417 relevant legal precedents, 68 federal aviation regulations, and Atlantic Airways' complete public policy manual." Lisa and Marcus exchanged glances. In their combined 60 years of legal practice, they'd never encountered a witness like Elijah. "The judge has granted their motion for a special competency hearing," Lisa reminded them. "They're still trying to disqualify Elijah's testimony." "Let them try," Marcus replied confidently. This young man will impress any judge with his knowledge and recall. Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan Pierce led his own preparation session with airline executives. "The boy is our biggest problem," Pierce admitted. "Juries love child witnesses, and this one has perfect recall. We need to find ways to undermine his credibility without appearing to attack a child." "What about his mother?" asked Michael Reynolds, the head flight attendant who had threatened to remove the Carters from the plane. "Can we focus on her instead?" "We're working that angle," Pierce confirmed. "We've got 3 witnesses who will testify about her aggressive behavior in professional settings." "Are they credible?" asked Sarah Thompson nervously. Pierce's expression hardened. "They'll say what we need them to say." The next day, as Jasmine arrived at the courthouse for a pre-trial hearing, she was confronted by reporters shouting questions. "Dr. Carter, sources claim you filed numerous discrimination complaints throughout your career. Comment? Is it true you're using your son to generate sympathy for a fraudulent lawsuit? Do you deny allegations that you threatened other passengers on that flight?" Marcus quickly escorted her inside, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "Planted stories," he muttered. "They're trying to poison the jury pool." Inside, they discovered that Bradford's connections extended even to the court. The originally assigned judge had recused himself due to previously undisclosed conflicts of interest, and Judge Franklin Wilson had taken over, a conservative jurist with a history of ruling against discrimination claims. Later that week, at the competency hearing, Pierce argued vehemently against allowing Elijah to testify. "Your Honor, regardless of this child's supposed memory abilities, he lacks the cognitive development to understand the complexities of aviation law and discrimination claims. His testimony would be essentially that of a puppet, repeating phrases his mother and attorneys have taught him." Marcus Johnson rose slowly, his dignified presence commanding the courtroom's attention. "Your Honor, I suggest we let Elijah Carter speak for himself. 5 minutes of conversation with this remarkable young man will demonstrate his competence more effectively than hours of our arguments." Judge Wilson considered, then nodded. "I'll interview the boy in my chambers. Counsel from both sides may observe but not interrupt." In the judge's wood panel chambers, Elijah sat straight-backed in an oversized leather chair, his feet barely touching the floor. "Young man," Judge Wilson began, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elijah replied clearly. "You need to determine if I'm competent to provide testimony in our case against Atlantic Airways. Specifically, you're evaluating my cognitive ability to understand the legal concepts involved and my capacity to distinguish between what I've directly experienced versus what I might have been told by others." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's correct. Can you tell me, in your own words, what happened on that flight?" For the next 20 minutes, Elijah provided a detailed, chronological account of the incident, citing specific times, verbatim conversations, and relevant regulations without notes. He explained complex legal concepts in simple language and demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of burden of proof and evidentiary standards. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Pierce seemed stunned. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. "Motion denied. The court finds Elijah Carter not only competent but extraordinarily qualified to testify." As they prepared to leave, a clerk rushed in with breaking news. Financial records obtained through discovery had revealed that Bradford's pharmaceutical company had recently signed a $30 million contract to exclusively supply medications to Atlantic Airways first aid kits. The contract had been finalized the day before their flight. "This creates a clear conflict of interest," Lisa explained to Jasmine later. "Bradford wasn't just a random passenger, he had a business relationship with the airline that gave him leverage over the staff. Can we use this at trial?" Jasmine asked. Marcus nodded. "It establishes motive for the preferential treatment he received and explains why the airline supported his version of events without investigation." As the final days before trial approached, the pressure intensified. Police surveillance outside their apartment identified suspicious vehicles making repeated passes. Their legal team began using encrypted communications after evidence of email hacking emerged. The most painful blow came when Jasmine received a call from Dr. Lisa Chen, her mentor and the head of neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial. "Jasmine," Dr. Chen said, her voice strained, "I've been directed by the board to offer you a position heading our new research center in Phoenix. Twice your current salary, full funding for your research, complete autonomy." "That sounds amazing," Jasmine replied cautiously. "Why now?" The silence on the line spoke volumes. Finally, Dr. Chen sighed. "The offer is contingent on resolving your current legal matters, discreetly." "You mean dropping the lawsuit?" "I fought for you, Jasmine. I really did. But Bradford's connections run deep, and several board members have pharmaceutical ties." After declining the offer, Jasmine sat on their balcony, watching the sunset with Elijah. "They offered me my dream job," she said quietly. "Everything I've worked for." Elijah leaned against her shoulder. "In exchange for our silence." "Yes. If we accept," Elijah said thoughtfully, "would you be happy, knowing how we got it?" Jasmine kissed the top of his head. "When did you get so wise?" The night before the trial, their legal team gathered for final preparations. Marcus Johnson reviewed key points while Lisa distributed updated witness lists. "Bradford's team has subpoenaed 23 character witnesses against you, Jasmine," Lisa explained. "Most are colleagues who've had minimal interaction with you." "And Elijah," Marcus added gently, "Pierce has submitted 300 potential questions for your cross-examination. They're planning to keep you on the stand for hours, hoping you'll make a mistake." Elijah nodded calmly. "I've prepared for that possibility, Mr. Johnson. I've studied every question and categorized them by objective. 70% are designed to confuse timeline details. 20% attempt to create contradictions between my testimony and the recordings. The remaining 10% are emotional triggers designed to make me appear childish or upset." The room fell silent as everyone stared at the 9-year-old who had just dissected the opposition's entire strategy. "Well," Marcus finally said with a smile, "I believe we're ready." That night, as Jasmine tucked Elijah into bed, she asked, "Are you scared about tomorrow?" Elijah considered the question seriously. "Yes," he admitted. "But I remember what you told me when I started first grade and was afraid. Being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling afraid and doing what's right anyway." Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she held her son close. Tomorrow they would face one of the most powerful corporations in America, with millions of dollars and teams of attorneys arrayed against them. But they wouldn't face it alone. As they slept, supporters gathered outside the courthouse, holding candles and signs reading, "Justice for the Carters," and "Stand with Elijah." The story of a 9-year-old boy standing up against corporate discrimination had captured the nation's attention. By morning, the crowd had grown to hundreds. As Jasmine and Elijah arrived, accompanied by their legal team, the supporters formed a protective pathway, shielding them from hostile reporters and creating a moment of beauty in the midst of their struggle. Elijah straightened his small shoulders, took his mother's hand, and walked forward to face whatever came next. The courtroom fell silent as Elijah Carter approached the witness stand. At 4'6", he needed a special booster seat to be visible above the polished wooden barrier. His navy blue suit, carefully chosen to project seriousness without appearing theatrical, had been tailored to his small frame. Judge Wilson leaned forward. "Son, do you understand what an oath is?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elijah replied clearly. "It's a solemn promise to tell the truth. I understand that breaking an oath in court is perjury, a federal offense carrying penalties including imprisonment." The judge nodded, somewhat taken aback by the precise answer. After Elijah was sworn in, Marcus Johnson approached for direct examination. "Elijah, please tell the court what happened when you and your mother boarded Atlantic Airways Flight 372 on June 15. For the next 45 minutes, Elijah testified with remarkable clarity, recounting the events chronologically without notes. The jury listened intently, many taking notes. Several jurors looked disturbed when Elijah recounted the discriminatory comments and differential treatment. "And what did Flight Attendant Reynolds say when your mother presented her boarding pass for the third time?" Marcus asked. "He said, and I quote, 'These people always think they're entitled to special treatment.'" Then he turned to Mr. Bradford and said, "Sir, I apologize for this unfortunate situation. We'll resolve it immediately." As Elijah's testimony continued, Jonathan Pierce grew visibly agitated, frequently conferring with his associates and passing notes to Atlantic Airways executives. Finally, Marcus concluded his questioning. "Elijah, in your own words, why do you believe what happened on that flight was discrimination?" Elijah took a deep breath. "Because the rules were applied differently to us than to other passengers. My mother and I presented valid boarding passes for our assigned seats, yet we were questioned repeatedly and threatened with removal. Mr. Bradford presented no documentation for his claim to our seats, yet he was believed immediately. The only visible difference between us was the color of our skin." Pierce stood for cross-examination, adjusting his tie as he approached the stand. His strategy was clear from his first question. "Elijah, isn't it true that your mother has coached you extensively on what to say today?" "Objection." Marcus called. "Assumes facts not in evidence." "Sustained," Judge Wilson ruled. "Counsel, rephrase." Pierce smiled thinly. "Elijah, how many hours have you spent preparing for your testimony?" "Approximately 87 hours over the past 5 months, Elijah answered honestly. 87 hours, Pierce repeated significantly to the jury. "And during these 87 hours, did your mother tell you what to say?" "No, sir. She told me to tell the truth." Pierce looked skeptical. "You expect this court to believe that a 9-year-old child independently memorized complex aviation regulations without guidance?" "I have a photographic memory, sir. I read the regulations myself and remembered them." Pierce changed tactics. "Let's talk about the recording you made on the plane. Isn't it true that recording without consent is illegal in many jurisdictions?" "Georgia is a one-party consent state, sir. As my mother was a party to all recorded conversations and consented to the recording, it was legal. Additionally, federal courts have consistently held that there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in public spaces of commercial aircraft." Pierce blinked, momentarily thrown by the sophisticated legal answer. He recovered quickly. "You mentioned hearing flight attendants make racist comments. Yet conveniently, these alleged comments don't appear in your recordings. Why is that?" "The comments were made in a galley area while I was walking to the restroom. I wasn't recording at that specific moment, but I remember them verbatim due to my photographic memory." "So we only have your word for it," Pierce said dismissively. "Now, isn't it true that your mother became agitated and raised her voice during the boarding process?" "My mother spoke firmly but professionally until Mr. Bradford attempted to physically remove our belongings. At that point, she raised her voice to say, 'Sir, do not touch our property.' This is documented in Recording Exhibit 4B at timestamp 9 hours 58 minutes and 42 seconds. Hour after hour, Pierce attempted to confuse Elijah, to catch him in contradictions or force an emotional outburst. He jumped between topics, misquoted previous testimony, and introduced hypothetical scenarios designed to mislead. Through it all, Elijah remained composed, often correcting Pierce's misstatements with precise references to the evidence. When Pierce deliberately misquoted a regulation, Elijah politely asked if he could see the text, then pointed out the discrepancy. By the afternoon's end, Pierce was visibly frustrated. His final attempt came with a seemingly innocent question. "Elijah, you mentioned that Mr. Bradford appeared to know Flight Attendant Thompson. What exactly did you see?" "I observed Mr. Bradford wink at Ms. Thompson during boarding, and she nodded in response. Later, during the meal service, he addressed her as Sarah, though she wasn't wearing a visible name tag, indicating prior acquaintance." Pierce pounced. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted a simple friendly interaction? After all, you were actively looking for evidence of conspiracy. Elijah considered the question. That would be possible, yes, except for what I observed at timestamp 10 hours 42 minutes and 17 seconds on recording exhibit 5A, when Mr. Bradford whispered to Ms. Thompson, "Remember our arrangement." Additionally, documents produced during discovery show 17 text messages between Mr. Bradford and Ms. Thompson in the 24 hours preceding our flight. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. This connection hadn't been previously disclosed. Pierce's face reddened as he realized Elijah had just introduced damaging evidence that his team had somehow missed. "No further questions," Pierce snapped, returning to his seat. Judge Wilson turned to Marcus. "Redirect?" Marcus approached the stand. "Elijah, you've testified for nearly 5 hours today. During that time, you've cited specific timestamps, quoted conversations verbatim, and referenced dozens of regulations. How are you able to recall all this information?" Elijah's posture relaxed slightly. "My memory works like a camera, sir. Once I see or hear something, I can access it later in perfect detail. Doctors at Johns Hopkins confirmed my photographic memory when I was 4 years old." "Thank you, Elijah. One final question. Mr. Pierce suggested you were coached on what to say today. Is that true?" "No, sir. My mother and our attorneys only asked me to tell the truth, exactly as I remembered it." "Thank you. No further questions." As Elijah stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained unusually quiet. Several jurors watched him with undisguised admiration as he returned to his seat beside Jasmine. The final bombshell came during Marcus Johnson's closing argument the following day. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "throughout this trial, we've demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory treatment against Dr. Carter and her son. But what we haven't yet revealed is perhaps the most disturbing evidence of all." He displayed a document on the courtroom screen. This email, obtained during discovery but initially encrypted, was sent from defendant Bradford to Atlantic Airways CEO William Parker the day before the flight. It reads, and I quote, "Parker, I'll need special handling tomorrow on Flight 372. There's a booking error showing some diversity higher in my preferred seat. Have your people take care of it discreetly. Remember, 30 million reasons our partnership matters more than some random passengers." The courtroom erupted. Pierce leapt to his feet, objecting vehemently that the email hadn't been properly introduced during trial. As Judge Wilson called for order, Elijah leaned toward his mother. "Mom," he whispered, "we did it." Hours later, as the jury began deliberations, reporters surrounded the courthouse. The case had captured national attention, with hashtags like #StandWithElijah and #CarterVS.Discrimination trending across social media. Inside their temporary legal war room, Jasmine hugged Elijah close. "No matter what happens now, I'm so proud of you. You stood up not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of who they are." Elijah nodded against her shoulder. "I know, Mom. But I still hope we win." The verdict took only 4 hours, remarkably quick for such a complex case. As the courtroom filled for the announcement, Jasmine gripped Elijah's hand so tightly he could feel her pulse racing through her fingers. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Wilson entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreperson, a retired schoolteacher, stood. "We have, Your Honor." As the clerk read the verdict, each word fell like thunder in the silent courtroom. "On the count of racial discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, we find for the plaintiffs. On the count of defamation, we find for the plaintiffs. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find for the plaintiffs." Count after count, the verdict came back unanimous in favor of the Carters. When the damages were announced, $12 million in compensatory damages and $48 million in punitive damages, gasps echoed through the courtroom. Judge Wilson addressed the jury. Does the jury wish to make any additional statements for the record? The foreperson nodded. Your Honor, the jury believes the evidence presented by Elijah Carter was crucial to our decision. His testimony demonstrated that Atlantic Airways engaged in a pattern of discriminatory behavior that went beyond a single incident. We hope this verdict sends a clear message that such treatment is unacceptable in our society. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Marcus Johnson made a brief statement. Today's verdict isn't just a victory for the Carter family. It's a statement that every American, regardless of race, deserves equal treatment under the law. In the following weeks, the impact of the case reverberated throughout the airline industry. The Department of Transportation launched a comprehensive investigation into discrimination complaints against major carriers. Atlantic Airways stock plummeted as investors questioned the company's leadership. Bradford faced his own reckoning. The Justice Department opened an investigation into potential perjury charges based on his conflicting testimony. His pharmaceutical company severed ties after the revelation of the 30 Million Reasons email, and several boards asked for his resignation. For Jasmine and Elijah, victory brought both opportunities and challenges. They received thousands of letters from people sharing similar experiences of discrimination in travel, healthcare, and education. Jasmine was offered a prestigious position at Massachusetts General Hospital, with full research funding and no strings attached. Most significantly, 2 months after the verdict, Jasmine received a call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Dr. Carter, the secretary began, we're establishing a national commission on eliminating bias in transportation. Given your experience and expertise, we'd like you to serve as a key advisor. I'm honored, Jasmine replied, but I'm not a transportation expert. Perhaps not, the secretary acknowledged, but your case has become a catalyst for change. And we'd like to include your son as a youth advisor. His perspective would be invaluable. The Commission's first major action was implementing what became known as the Carter Standard. A set of guidelines requiring all federally regulated transportation providers to demonstrate equal treatment for all passengers, with clear documentation and accountability measures. Elijah, now approaching his 10th birthday, found his own calling in the aftermath. With his mother's support, he established the Young Advocates Network, connecting children who had experienced discrimination with resources and support. On a crisp autumn morning 1 year after the verdict, Elijah stood before a classroom of middle school students in Atlanta. Gone was the shy boy who had boarded that fateful flight. In his place stood a confident young man with purpose in his eyes. Justice isn't just about winning in court, he told the students. It's about creating a world where cases like mine aren't necessary anymore. Where everyone is treated with dignity regardless of what they look like. A student raised her hand. Weren't you scared? Standing up against all those powerful people. Elijah smiled. Every day. But my mom taught me that courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about feeling afraid and doing what's right anyway. Later that day, as they walked through the airport for a flight to Washington, D.C. for a commission meeting, Jasmine noticed something remarkable. Airline staff throughout the terminal wore small pins with scales of justice on them. The symbol of the Carter Standard training they'd all completed. As they settled into their first-class seats, no questions asked about their boarding passes, Elijah looked out the window at the vast sky. Mom, he said thoughtfully, do you think we really changed things? Jasmine followed his gaze to the horizon. Look around, Elijah. What do you see? Flight attendants moved through the cabin, treating each passenger with the same respectful attention. The diverse group of travelers boarded without scrutiny or suspicion. The captain personally welcomed everyone aboard. I see progress, Elijah answered. Not perfection, but progress. Jasmine squeezed his hand. That's how change happens, baby. One flight, one case, one brave person at a time. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Elijah Carter, the boy whose perfect memory had changed aviation law forever, opened his notebook and began writing ideas for his next project. A children's book about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when you're only 9 years old. Elijah Carter's journey teaches us that courage comes in all sizes. When faced with injustice, this 8-year-old didn't just witness discrimination, he documented it, challenged it, and ultimately changed it. His story reminds us that knowledge is power. Elijah's photographic memory and passion for learning transformed him from a victim into an advocate. It shows us that speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, can move mountains. The story also highlights how systemic discrimination often hides behind policies selectively enforced. What happened to the Carters wasn't just about one flight or one airline employee, it revealed patterns that affected countless others. True change required not just winning a case but transforming an entire industry. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates that age is no barrier to making a difference. Elijah's courage inspired a movement larger than himself, proving that even the smallest among us can bend the arc of justice when armed with truth, persistence, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves dignity. What discrimination have you witnessed or experienced in your life? Would you have had the courage to stand up like Elijah did? Comment below and share your thoughts. If this story of resilience against racism moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration in their fight against injustice today. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters in creating a more just world for everyone, regardless of race or background.